Hi, I'm Maggie C, and I want to give you a bit of an overview of my story. It's just a little presentation, it won't take long hopefully, and it should tell you a little bit about who I am as a person and the story of how I got here. So I suppose I better start with who's that girl, because one of the biggest things about me is that I'm a Madonna fan. My favourite colour is green, and yeah, I'll tell you about the rest now. So I guess the first thing is where I've come from. As you can see here, that's my full family up in the corner, and that was us around 1972, 1973. And there's my mum, my brother Eric, his wife, Chris, my brother, oh shit. So I'll start that slide again. So yeah. So just to give you a little background about where I'm from and why my accent is like it is, I call it Wankshire, which is my way of saying that I'm a bit from Yorkshire, Manx and Welsh. So I'll tell you a bit about how I got here. Started off in the Isle of Man. I was born in the Isle of Man. The picture up in the top left is a full family picture from about 1972, 1973. You can probably tell by the clothes. There's my mum there, my brother Ray, his wife Chris, it was his girlfriend then, my brother Eric, my dad, and then kneeled on the floor is my sister Jeannie, and next to her is my sister Dolly with her daughter Julie. I'm the little blonde one in the middle, and the one at the end is Jeannie's husband, Keith. So not long after this picture, I won't tell you the full story, but long after this picture, Dolly met and married her husband. No, she didn't. So not long after this picture was taken, about 2 or 3 years after, Dolly left to go to live in Yorkshire, as did my sister Jeannie, who was married to a Yorkshireman. And then in 1980, I was 12 years old, and my father passed away. What I didn't know at the time was that he had cancer. I just thought he had a bad back. And I remember the morning that I was told that he died. And there was no sort of run up to it. There was no kind of warning. Although he was in hospital, I was visiting in hospital, I thought he was going to be coming out soon. I didn't realise that he was so poorly. I guess it was in a time that people didn't talk about things. When they had the funeral, my dad was old school and didn't want any women being at the funeral, so I didn't even go to the funeral. And then not long after, my mum, who I didn't know was suffering from, as it was no manic depression then, decided that she wanted to come and live near her other daughters, Jean and Dolly, in Yorkshire. So we made the move to Yorkshire, in Doncaster. And what I didn't know at the time, so it wasn't only a bit of a trauma about not coming to terms with Dad's death, but it was also that, we had a massive move. I moved into a new school. I had a strange voice, which is why I picked up the Yorkshire accent pretty quickly. And I also, one of the biggest things in my life was that I was a ballroom dancer, and I pretty much did ballroom 3-4 times a week, did competitions and medals, and I was actually being coached into starting teaching. I'd started taking kiddie classes, and that all stopped. So basically everything, my life that I'd had in the Isle of Man stopped. So we went to Doncaster. Mum bought a little house and we lived in Doncaster near my sister Jean. And Mum and I could never talk about Dad. She was obviously experiencing her own version of grief, and I was experiencing my version of grief. But it was also the fact that I was away from other family as well. When my brother Ray was still in the Isle of Man. Not that we had a close relationship. He always used to call me the bitch. But yeah, he was in the Isle of Man, and my brother Eric was in the Navy or down south at the time. So yeah, it was a kind of I lost a lot of things at that time, and when I think about it now, I think of it like not just grief, but maybe a little bit like PTSD anyway. So that happened, and I went to live in Doncaster. Can't say that I really settled in Doncaster. I was there for 20 years. I finished school with not an awful lot of O levels. I think it was CSEs at the time. I had a couple. I made up the rest. And I kind of left school and just got a job. My mum marched me off to the Arndale Centre and said, you've got two choices. You either go back to school and work hard or go and get a job. So I got a job in Argos. And the one thing I can say about Doncaster is that it wasn't all bad. The people I met were amazing. I had a very difficult time. I didn't know that I was suffering from eating disorders. I was actually anorexic at the time. And I didn't know, nothing was ever talked about. Nobody ever talked about mental health back then. Nobody ever talked about my dad. In fact, I think I was about 24 when I first spoke about my dad to a practitioner, and that was because I'd gone to a therapist to see about losing weight. And I think at size 8, she thought, well, what's this girl who's thin wanting to lose weight for? And she delved into my past a little bit. And it was only then that I really started talking about my dad, which was 12 years after he died. So that was the amount of impact it had on me. Yeah, I got married and divorced in Doncaster, and in 1999, and I was unmarried. I was with a guy that I didn't think I was going to go the distance with, and I was about 30 years old, I think I was 31, and I was getting clucky thinking that, I wanted to meet a baby daddy. So I left, and I'd never really settled in Yorkshire. I thought, I'll go home, and I'll go home to the Isle of Man, because I'd always considered it my home. So I went back. I managed to get a job, and within 2 days of landing and starting my new job, I got the sack. It was the shortest job ever. And I was like, oh, God, does this mean I should just go back, or should I stay? And I ended up staying for another 4 years in the Isle of Man. I did eventually get other jobs there, carried and actually projected my career into graphic design. So yeah, although it was only 4 years that I was back in the island, yeah, I really embraced all the new experiences and threw myself into living there. Moved my cat Cassie over with me, and yeah, I was actively looking for the baby daddy, and that's when I met my son's dad. I had beer goggles quite often, and this particular night, I always thought I'd like an Irishman or a Manxman. I've got a thing for Irishmen. And I thought, right, okay. And I'd seen this guy out, and our eyes had met across the dance floor. He always loved a good boogie. And yeah, I met my baby daddy. But unfortunately, because beer goggles, I thought he was Irish and he was Welsh. And I also found out his name wasn't Tommy from Ireland. But I couldn't ask him his name for about 3 weeks after because I was a bit embarrassed. So anyway, the long and short of it is we had 17 years together, and he had a house back in Wales in the Rhondda Valley, where we relocated to in 2004 while I was 6 months pregnant with our son. So that's how come I've got the accent that I have. I call it Wankshire because it's a bit of Manx, a bit of Yorkshire and a bit of Welsh. Been in Wales 18 years now and I love it. So my life in statistics, so I've given you a little bit of background. So I've had 20 homes in 55 years. I've had 32 jobs, and that's just the ones I can put on the CV in 32 years. I've experienced 6 deaths, 2 of which have been suicides. On the original picture that you saw before, so I lost my dad in 1980. My mum died in 2001 when I was in the Isle of Man. And then Julie, the little girl, the baby in the arms, she tried to take her life when she was 24 when she tried to take her life, and was saved by a liver transplant and lived for another 12 years. In 2008, she eventually died from the injuries that she'd sustained in the original attempt. So although she died in 2008, it was still classed as a suicide. My sister's husband took his own life. That was in 1996. That was the Annus Horribilis. During that year, Mum had been sectioned several times after suffering hypomanic episodes. I got married and divorced within that year. My brother split up from his wife after 25 years, which was a hell of a shock. It just seemed like everything was going wrong that year. Yeah, I probably should have put that in when I was living in Doncaster, which is probably one of the reasons I left Doncaster, is that, you know, everything seemed to go wrong. So, yeah, the last death. So when Julie died on the 31st of October 2008. And my brother Eric died of obesity-related heart failure on 6 weeks later in the December 2008. And then my brother Ray, who was the eldest, died in June 2020, having just turned 72. So yeah, there's not many of us left now, just the girls. So yeah, that's had a pretty significant effect on my life, I think. So next thing is the boyfriends. I'm not going to tell you how many. I know you all want to know, but actually I don't know that I've lost count, but I won't say that. But I've had 4 engagements, 1 marriage, 1 divorce, as I said earlier. I've had 3 pregnancies, and I've managed to bring 1 young boy up and keep him alive. He's 18 now, and learning day by day that this is a bigger job than I ever intended. I've also got 1 cat, and I've still got custody of the dog from when we split up a few years ago. As far as the impact on my mental health, obviously there's been a lot of things at play during all these years. So I've got 9 mental health official diagnoses. The first one is, oh, I'm pressing the wrong button. So the first one obviously is complex grief, which originally stems from my dad's death, but then, you know, obviously the others have come into play in there. I've got historic eating disorders, starting with anorexia in my teenage years, and latterly comfort, emotional eating, and it's just classed as a eating disorder now. I've had body dysmorphia from an early age. When I see pictures of myself as a young girl when I was thin, I remember thinking in my head that I was fat, I was huge. I've never really liked myself. In fact, the recent head shave that I've done has been a bit of a sort of self-sabotage thing, in a way to try and encourage myself to accept myself more, which is kind of working. So I'm still doing lots of therapy around that and the eating disorders. Nervous stability and stress. I don't tend to suffer from depression. I have depressive episodes where I kind of just, you know, don't want to talk to people. I hide myself away. A lot of people think, oh, you know, you're always so happy and cheery. But I do have depressive episodes, but I wouldn't call it depression. And it's usually around overwhelm or stress that I tend to suffer with that. I've been previously diagnosed as bipolar. I was diagnosed with postnatal depression. I also had a borderline personality. The latest ones are ADHD with cyclothymia, which cyclothymia is like a rapid cycling version of bipolar, and ADHD is supposedly neurodevelopment. But I always consider it's not what's wrong. I now consider it's not what's wrong with me, but what's happened to me. And I think, as you'll see, as I showed already, that, you know, maybe I've had quite a normal reaction to a lot of the adversities that's happened to me in my life, but I just didn't know how to deal with it. So, yeah, that's my mental health in a couple of slides. So this one, thank you to, I should mention Richard McCann for this, because I first saw it on one of his presentations. So there's a thing called bounce back ability. It's in the dictionary, and it means the ability to recover after a setback. Basically, it's about your resilience. So as you'll see, in the first few years of my life, everything was going along pretty nicely. There was a couple of little blips here and there. And then at 12 years old, I lost my dad, and that was quite a huge dip. But what always happens after something awful is that you do come back from it. You know, it might take a bit of time. As you see on the line of the graph, that then around sort of my mid-teenage years, it wasn't too bad, and then it dipped down again in my early when I was 19, and then I met who I thought was the man of my dreams, and it was age 24, so that was pretty highlight and great party. And then the annus horribilis after that. So as you can see, it dips down again by the time I'm 25. Those years after that were pretty rubbish. And by the time I was heading up to 30, I was barely coping, and that was when I made the decision to move to the Isle of Man. I got there, and even though it was a bit of a wobbly start, I liked it, but then Mum died, so that's another dip in the graph. But then I met the baby back daddy, and things seemed to go from strength to strength. Actually, yeah, the biggest peak is where I had my son Cole. So that's where I had the biggest peak, and then I had a bit of depression, and it was all gone down. And then, this was a bit weird. When I was 48, I didn't realise I was perimenopausal, and in a sort of psychotic episode, I tried to take my own life. So thankfully it didn't work, and I'm still here to tell the tale today. So here's where we are. I'm 55, heading on to 56 at the end of the year. So that's my bounce back ability. And what I would say about this is it's all about the ability to recover from any adversity. No matter what happens in your life and you feel as if it is the end of the world, and let me tell you, I have felt more than a million times that it's the end of the world, but it does pass, and it will pass, and there are better times ahead. You've just got to keep that in perspective. Are you okay, Sha? I can cut that out, don't worry. So what helps me to cope? Most of the time I divert myself into work and creativity. So somehow over the years and the jobs that I had, I managed to sort of carve a bit of a career in graphic design. I think just having that and being able to create things, even the slides, and make something look pretty, is always at a bit of an amazement to me that, you know, I'd like to explore the creativity more. But yeah, work is a massive coping tool for me, often to the point of distraction, but I'll go into that. Pets, I love my pets. I can't come home to an empty house. I adore music, not just Madonna, but I love all sorts of music, particularly indie. So yeah, and I've recently discovered a love of going to grassroots festivals, where I meet lots of friends and just have the greatest time. And yeah, friends are a big part of my life. I have loads of friends. I call a lot of people besties. I must be the luckiest girl in the world to have so many besties. I've got incredible friends in all parts of the country and places where I've been and left and come back. And another thing has been food. Another coping tool has been food, and I've included it because it's not a comfortable thing to talk about, because I didn't know I was emotionally eating, but obviously that has been a bit of the case. Some of that has been the use of antidepressants, which I'm still on now. That it tends to keep the weight on. When I first went on antidepressants, I went from a size 12 to a size 22 within 18 months. So, and that wasn't just all food. It just seemed to come on all of a sudden. So some of them are good coping tools, and some of them are not. And the reason why some of them are not, even though they're positive ones, and I don't tend to drink very often, the reason why some of them are bad ones is because, you know, sometimes I use them negatively to cope and distract myself from things rather than actually you know, addressing problems. So this year I'm trying to address some of my weight issues because I need to get off my knees, and I'm trying to put myself before the work, but that's always a struggle because I'm so passionate about what I do. So in 2017, after I heard my cousin's son took his life, I decided to unshelve an idea I had about doing a wellbeing magazine. I did a crowdfunder and I managed to raise enough funds to produce and print 1,000 copies, which is me there at the launch. Little did I know, in the background is the Samaritans, who then head hunted me and asked me to go to an information evening, and that took me on a different course. So yeah, I set up Mindarium magazine, and in 2019 I actually set it up as a KIC. So it's not it's Mindarium KIC is now a registered community interest company, which I'll be taking forward in the future. So as I said, Samaritans sort of hoiked me at that event, and One of the proudest things I've ever done, and one of the greatest skills I've ever learned, is how to be a Samaritan. I've not done any in the last year or two, although I still do posters for them. But the shifts I've done in 2018, 2019 amounted to over 200 hours. So I'm very proud to say that I went into schools and did presentations, which I never thought I could do. Gone out in community events, and and then eventually became an actual listening Samaritan, which I don't do at the moment. I also was invited to become a service user representative for the Cumtath Morgannwg Health Board. What this actually means is, because I've used the services of health services, so I've used primary or secondary care, which I still don't understand what that means, but because I've used their mental health services, I was selected to be a representative on their local health board forums. The one that I particularly wanted to do, because of my background, was the Suicide and Self-Harm Forum, which I'm now the chair of the expert advisory group that's on the CTM Health Board. I always used to be on the Third Sector Forum as well. I've also participated in the Children and Young People, because I'm passionate about education. Through my work with the COALC, I've also been invited to the co-occurring and substance misuse panel, and in the last year or so been invited to the psychological therapies forum. During my time there, I was asked to participate in a project for the Welsh Ambulance Service to produce a leaflet for mental health support. The idea being that when they were out on a first response, that as they weren't counsellors or had emotional health training, they wanted to have a signpost where to signpost people. So we engaged with loads of partners to do that, and I did the design for that, and that was printed. It's been reprinted. I think that's on about its 4th or 5th reprint, and goes out pan Wales with all the Welsh Ambulance Service. I'm also a member, or I was, I'm a bit dormant at the moment, of the Wales National Forum. So during my time as a service user rep, after I'd done that, hang on, are you okay? Because I've just seen your thing, I'm just going to have a quick drink. Okay? Are you bored?
No.
You didn't know half of this, did you?
Yeah.
Some of it.
Yeah.
So, should I go back to that one? Right. So after I'd done the Welsh Ambulance leaflet, it gave me an idea to do something for men's suicide, because the men's suicide rates are 3 times higher than females, and that's not just in Wales or the UK, that's across the world. And I thought, well, we need to maybe we could do something that goes into tattooists or barbers, to encourage men to know what signs to look for and stuff like that. So I had £1,000 from the local health board to do this idea that I had, and we engaged with about 50 different partners, and we came up with the CSA signpost, which was based on the Zero Suicide Alliance campaign of the same name. They allowed me to borrow it for this. It's something I'm really proud of, because I worked with a local artist, Bagsy, to create the design. I was inspired by a programme that Grayson Perry did some years ago, where he looked at all men. I think the programme was called All Man or something, and they had cage fighters, and they were fighting with each other, and then he talked to them about their mental health, and they were saying that, you know, they'd rather fight in a cage with another man than talk about their mental health. They felt it was very difficult for them to talk. And that image stuck with me, and I worked with Bagsy to come up with this image that I felt was something that men would pick up. And this is a campaign that I'm still, this is now in its third run. It's changed a little bit from the details that you see there. But it was during this that I met a lady called Nicola Smurden, and she'd lost her son Tom earlier that year. This was in December 2019, so she lost Tom in March 2019. And we got to talking, and she absolutely loved the idea of the leaf. This was before it was even produced. And we started talking about this issue. She openly told me that her son had been out the night before and he'd taken cocaine with alcohol, and she believed that it was somehow connected to his suicide attempt. And I had said to her, I met a lady a few years earlier at another mental health conference who'd shared her story about her son Jacob, and I said, why isn't there more known about this? Why isn't there more being done about this? So the long story short, it started off with a bit of a survey during lockdown, because we weren't into lockdown then, of course. The leaflet was put on hold, but we did a couple of campaigns online, and I launched it on a website. But significantly, we did a survey to find out what people's attitudes were around cocaine and alcohol, and we had over 820 responses within about a week. And that gave me the impetus to think, well, if there's 820 people obviously not died, but affected by this, then this must be quite huge in our communities. And anyway, we set up, I decided to set up a meeting to discuss this, because every time I went to somebody higher up in any of the meetings that I was at, sort of, and we didn't know why, they were sort of ignoring it. So that's when I set up the Co-Alk Alliance, and originally it was to, I spoke to Nicola Abraham from the Jacob Abraham Foundation in Cardiff, and between us we decided to set up the Co-Alk Alliance. It represents Jacob, who died, I think that's 2014, can't you see it on here? And Thomas, who died in 2019. And then in 2022, we had a call. I started work on the Co-Alk website, and I produced some of our work on there. And we were contacted, sadly, by a third lady, Mandy Naylor. Well, it was actually Nadine. It was her daughter Nadine who found us. And they've now sadly become the third member of the group, as they lost Sean. Actually, as I'm doing this now, it's 2 years today. So Sean died exactly 2 years ago, in the same circumstances as the other boys. They'd taken cocaine on a night out. They weren't even buying it, they just had a sniff. I think it's a key, they call it. And apparently that's the culture that is that's how the culture is now when kids are out drinking. So it's not a club any of us want to be in, but we are doing some great stuff with it. What we've done earlier this year, is we held a conference, and we produced podcasts from that conference, which are now on the website and the Central Club podcast. We're starting to work with different people. We've got a partnership with the University of South Wales, which is, we're hoping to review the results of the scope out of literature that they've done, and look at ways of gathering more research on this going forward. So yeah, we've also I'm also in the process of producing a report which we're wanting to send out to GPs and healthcare providers in Wales. So we're doing an awful lot of work behind the scenes, let me tell you. I've got another year that I'm hoping to work for the girls. I do it as permitted work on a basis that I can cope with. Obviously, with my mental health difficulties, it's not, I can't work every day. I say like a normal person, but yeah, I have to take breaks and take care of my mental health. So one of the things that I found from my journey, I tell other people's stories a lot better than I tell my own, but I've started telling my own story now. And I think the reason why I do share such a lot of my stories is because I think ultimately it's a way of connecting with people, you know, and it makes it less, I think people identify with some of the themes that I've brought up in the past, and it makes them less scared to open up about their problems. And whether it's to me, directly to me, that you open up, or whether it's even inboxing me with a question. For instance, when I was in America, I had 3 people who contacted me for advice about their children or their grown-up children, and I was able to signpost them to services. I'm not a counsellor. I'm under no delusions of what my role is. It's simply as a signposter, but you know, if people need help, I will give it to them. So, but yeah, your words can become a page in someone else's survival guide, and if I can do that, if I can help somebody else just by sharing my story, that's why I do what I do. So here's some of the things that I'm involved with. I'm on social media as Maggie C. I did put at the beginning, I've got a website which is www.maggiec.net, where I put more about my personal things on. I'll probably put this blog on there. I'm all about promoting the lived experience as a way of healing and as a way of understanding and educating. I'm proud to be a co-director of Inform Cumtach Morgannwg, who I'm now working with to create a network in Wales of other lived experience peer support groups. We're doing a lot of exciting work with that at the moment. I've also created 2 websites, very poorly, but the CSA signpost one is still up and running. I don't really do much on that now, but now I get add little bits to it. I also do more on the COALT website, which, like I say, the podcasts from the conference are on there. I've also mental health first aider, DBS checked, and have done the assist courses, as well as a fully trained Samaritan. And I continue to share my experiences through various different projects. So I hope it's been of some interest, and if you feel you have any questions, please get in touch. Thank you.